evening to all of you from Chicago. For me, it's evening. I'm sure for everybody around the world here, it's probably different, whether morning or afternoon. But either way, it is a real pleasure to be here. And yeah, thank you all for making the time to attend the webinar. We've all learned a lot from the last year, and we've also lived through a lot. COVID's put every country, every person through some major changes. But what I'm going to take you through is not so much a recap of last year. We've all lived it. What I'm going to take you through is my research about the consumer trends that really matter. And what I mean by really matter is they are going to be driving growth in the next 3 to 5 years for the companies that can see them, adapt to them, and build either products or services around them. Because what I'm going to show you are changes in consumer behavior that are big changes from where they were in 2019. And we have every reason to believe, based on the data, that they're going to continue to stick. So let me take you through some of those in terms of what we're going to see. And the reason it's so important is we've seen these changes come at a speed that's really just been completely unprecedented and very unbelievable. And if you go back to an author and journalist, Graham Wood, he had written a major piece about how fast history is changing. In other words, the cycles of change are increasing. And if you look at the technology underlying almost everything we do today, whether it's phones, whether it's computers, all the application systems, companies are changing faster. And the product development cycles are changing faster. But if in 2019, if you were looking at the food industry, and if you saw it across the EU in many cases, and it doesn't matter whether you're looking at the UK, Germany, France, Spain, etc. I could pull up a lot of these country charts, and you'd see the same thing. A lot of very low single-digit growth. Here in the US, for the 4 years changing up till 2019, it was 1 to 2% growth, and that's for the total food industry. But when 2020 occurred, it changed everything. It changed the supply chains. It changed how people interacted. It changed the places where people worked. It changed the security of the food supply chain and caused people to think about what happens when grocery stores are empty. But most importantly, it challenged our health and safety. And as a result, we've seen changes from the retailers in very different ways. They've overhauled their stores to make sure that ordering patterns can match what customers need. E-commerce has raced ahead much faster than anybody predicted, almost across every country, even in places and countries where e-commerce and omnichannel have been present for many years. So the changes in what a store means, the fact that it's a place where people go to buy food, or the restaurant is a place where people go, the basic fundamentals of how people shop, how they buy, and what they buy were all changed. And part of that resulted in some of the biggest changes. And here is just the US. We saw an 11% increase after years of 1 to 2% growth. What a big difference. And what we've done now is hit a new level in terms of sales that elevates the impact of this. So for the companies that want to be able to keep their share of sales moving forward from that big piece of growth, here are the 4 themes that really matter. These things accelerated in 2020. What we found in research across countries, and I'll take you through some of the US research here in a little different area. We found a segment of two different segments of consumers that drove almost all the growth in the meat department and several others. In other words, people that have chosen to really expand their cooking methods, their recipes, and their confidence by buying a lot of different cuts of meat and also changing the kind of foods they put on the table. So there we have long-term behavior and a very definable set of customers that's likely to change no matter whether restaurants come back. We also saw changes in the store across to all income levels that drove a major increase in premium foods across almost every category. And that's remarkable when you think about the economic pain inflicted in so many different countries. And it's easy to dismiss it and say, this is a rich person's desired, they bought more expensive foods. But you'd be missing the point, because what we saw is that every income group low, medium, high, all those increase the purchases of premium products. And it's not about just buying expensive products. It's about they're buying it to make their lives better. The third big piece is new occasions, new platforms. We saw a major dislocation for where people work. Instead of going to the office or working from home, no matter whether you're looking at the US or the EU in different places, more and more people will be working from their homes going forward. And that's a major change in terms of where people are eating, and that changes the opportunities to sell and market new food and build new products. And the same thing for new innovation platforms. It's easy to talk about all the new kitchen equipment because it's kind of cool. Everybody has been buying new equipment to upgrade their kitchens. But what this is creating is new innovation platforms. And then the same thing for how people buy. No longer are they dependent on restaurants or stores to buy from. Now it's a lot more location independent, and people can search for the best prices. So omni-channel now has taken over and become a major factor in almost every part of the consumer purchase journey and decision journey. And that changes a lot of other different decisions. But let's go ahead and meet the confident cook. And what I mean by this is a good example of, in the United States, the segments that we found that really, really mattered, that drove growth. But the same dynamics hold in many countries across Europe. But let me give you the US example of what I mean by the long-term changes in cooking behavior. So on the left bar here, we've isolated 3 different groups. One is the confident cooks. And the red one is a cooking enthusiast, and light blue is all others. In the US, as an example, most households across an entire year only buy 10 cuts of meat. Like, only 10. Some countries, it may be 8. In other countries, it may be 6 or 7. Very rarely do you go more than 10. But what's amazing, and if you look back between 2019 and 2020, the average in the US was 10.2 in 2019. It was average of 10.4 in 2020. For the confident cooks, this is a household that used to buy 10 cuts of meat. Last year, they bought 18. And they not only tried each of those cuts, but they rebought those cuts. The same thing for the cooking enthusiasts, that make up about 22% of the population. They went from 10 cuts on average to about 14. So these are households that are experimenting, learning, and they've become very confident in the kitchen. And a big part of that has been about bringing that restaurant experience home. But it's not even just the cooking behavior. The impact on dollars is even greater. They control about 36% of all the dollars spent. But what's fascinating is if you look at the growth, and the growth in the meat industry was in the mid-teens last year in the US, these 2 segments explain 97% of all the incremental growth in the meat category. In other words, if you are a retailer, you need to know these people. If you're a meat processor, you need to know who these people are to be able to connect, because it's a really big deal. And it represents, so much more of the impact overall. So the idea that there's a population, at least 2 population segments across most countries, these are the long-term cooking enthusiasts that learn some behavior, and it matters. We saw big increases in terms of meat and seafood, especially in the seafood side. It was a very, very big deal last year. You can see the change overall, 27% in 19 here in the US. And one of the keys that I've always looked at when you look at consumer behavior across the meat and seafood department in particular is once people start buying seafood, fresh seafood regularly, that they've expanded and their education, they feel confident in the kitchen. And when you see that kind of change happen, it's a really big deal, because that once people have that confidence, they're willing to continue to try. And think about that from a retailer's side. What a dream. Now you have someone who's an active buyer, a large buyer of products, and they're trying all kinds of different variety. This is exactly the kind of customer you want to attract. And if you're a meat processor or packer, you want to find those people too. So who are they? In the US, they balance out to be slightly more affluent. They do skew Asian and African American in particular in the US, a little less than Hispanic, but more Hispanic than the US average, and they tend to be larger households. So the idea of bringing the restaurant home was a big theme in the focus groups when we asked people more about why and how they were spending their time in the kitchen and what they were doing with the recipes. And it tended to be households with a head about 45 to 64. We have a lot more information on each one of these households. We can identify the households even across in the US and likely in other countries as well. But if you think about the powerful change that happened and think about how does it explain and how well it explains the growth across many other categories, this is the group that you can lock into as a customer side to drive your growth going forward. Now let's talk about the other bit, one of the next big topic that drove growth all the way across the store, and it's all about going premium. In the midst of a major economic churn, these are US examples, but you can begin to see it when you tier out each of the categories across the store and rank items by price per volume and kind of order it by super premium, premium, and mainstream value, private label. At the end of the day, what we saw were growth at the higher end, and it was a big deal all the way across. And you could see it not only in the meat from the left side, but also in what we call MULO, or that's all outlets. So we saw that across all categories, across all stores. But what's fascinating is it's not a rich person's thing. This is not about rich people just buying more expensive products. Here's the mix of products bought and the increases versus a year ago for low, middle, and high income households here in the US. And again, this same trend holds across most European countries, slightly different based on households and income strata, et cetera, but the same dynamic holds, which is, the increase in premium and super premium was a big deal last year. And again, it's not so much about, gee, I want to go buy something expensive or that's a cool brand. It's about making people's lives better. In other words, buying an indulgence that made that meal a little bit more special or made that family moment just that much more important, because so much was challenging last year. So the whole idea of premium brands and making life better was a really big concept. And when you look at it across the US, here's an example of what I mean. So even if this is what we call a due to analysis. In other words, what was the increase in price per volume, versus a year ago, but what was the total sales increase due to? Well, in the dark blue part, it's, that part is the increase due to increased shelf prices. Last year, certainly in the US and across a lot of countries, there was an increase in shelf prices. That would naturally raise prices. In many cases, there were reductions in promotion. In the US, there was a substantial amount of reduction in promotion. That's going to grow product too, potentially, and you're selling more at full price. But the green part is all about the growth in the category relative to the increase going from a lower price product to a higher price product. And that's what we call mix shift. So you can see the difference between all three of those, but mix shift explains an awful lot, whether it's luncheon meat, frozen meat, or even some of the center store categories. Very, very big differences, but there's an awful lot all the way through. And you can see it too, even on the meat side. Here across, whether it's seafood, prime beef, ground bison or other ground exotic, differently cut pork, etc. All the premium cuts grew faster than average. And what's fascinating is it's not just meat, it's across the store. So selling and marketing of premium matters, and it will continue to matter as people bring the restaurant home. They want that great experience at home, and that power of at-home cooking. People are willing to spend a little bit more because it saves them so much versus going out. Now let's talk about the third big trend, which is all about the evolution of new behaviors. Most of us, including me, right now, I am working from home, like many of you, but going forward, it's not about whether we're working at home, working in the office or not. What we're going to see is likely a permanent change for many people, that they're going to be working at least more days at home at some point. And whether it's in the US or whether it's in different countries in the European Union, this increase is likely to stay at some point. So here's the math of how I see it in the US and why it's so important. If you think about 155 million people in the workforce, and you think about the fact that there will be a 3 to 4% or 3 to 4 times increase compared to 2017 of the people working at home. In other words, the US government estimates 20 to 25% of the US working population will be working at home. So if you take 20% of 155, that gets you to 33 million new lunch occasions every day. That means people are not going to the company cafeteria to the office. They're not necessarily going downtown to that office to stop by the restaurant that's right by the office and go out. They're going to find a way to go out around their house, or they're going to prepare a nice meal at home. That change in lunch occasion, that change in breakfast occasion is a huge shift. And if you're a breakfast meat producer in these countries, that's a very big opportunity to try to win some new business. So the fact is we're seeing millions and millions of lunch and breakfast occasions change. And then similarly, from a dinner side, it changes as well. Many countries have seen over the last 10 years a reduction in terms of the time amount for planning, of time for planning for dinner. But now with people working at home, there's more time for planning, more time to engage. So the idea of building innovation around creating a real breakfast experience at home for people, or a different one, how to create an instant or a better work from home lunch, or how to teach people that and encourage people and inspire people to be able to cook differently at home is a big opportunity for innovation. I think we'll continue to see it roll out. No matter whether we're looking in the EU, I know pressure cookers have been big in the Netherlands since 2009. The UK Instant Pot shown here is probably the #2 pressure cooker in the US. It's #1, but nonetheless, it doesn't matter which brand of the product necessarily here. It's the platform of pressure cooking, the platform of air frying, the platform of potentially smoking or grilling different kinds of meats. The growth of these appliances took off again in 2020, and the growth of these products now in the US, 60% of the households have Instant Pots or pressure cookers. That's a very big deal. And what we're seeing now are companies innovating, building platforms. This is Tiller and Hatch here, but they have built an entire line now of products focused on helping people build creative recipes to use these tools. So it's not so much about does your product go as an ingredient into something. Think about how to get the most out of these kitchen appliances and build new products around these. And that's just one example. The other big example that we've seen in terms of new platforms, new occasions, is the idea of shoppable recipes. So price and coupons don't work like they used to. In fact, in the US here, circulars are almost at the point of where a lot of retailers are looking to find any possible reason to just stop sending circulars around. But the idea of using social media to drive what we call shoppable recipes that you can look at, click on, decide you love it, and then go right to the store where those ingredients go right into your e-commerce basket. And you can pick it up at your local retailer either on the way home from work, or if you're running an errand out later on that day. But the idea of going directly from recipe and inspiration right to that basket is becoming more and more commonplace. If you're under 30 years of age in the US, you're looking very hard at these kind of platforms. So as a manufacturer, getting your product on this kind of a platform is a really big demand driver that changes behavior. If you think about even 4 weeks ago, here in the US, we had a rampant viral video that went around with feta and tomatoes and turned into a special sauce. There was just one recipe that we could not keep feta cheese on the shelf in the US because of the impact of that social media campaign. It was fascinating. And it drove people nuts that we couldn't keep just a basic product. on the shelf. But the impact of social media and shoppable recipes is something that's going to continue to go on, beyond COVID here, and it's going to live on as a big growth driver in the next 5 years. And then finally, as we move to wrap up, let me talk about buying out of the store. E-commerce has been coming for so many years, and I know the U.S. is a little bit behind. If you go to South Korea or some other Asian countries, it's many different, it's several years ahead of where the U.S. is. But last year, what we saw was a huge increase across the board in e-commerce sales, well over 100%. In fact, fresh foods had a major breakthrough where it's now about 10% of total U.S. fresh food sales. But it grew 87%. This is a very big breakthrough. And basically, at the end of the day, if you looked at IRI's forecasts where we thought e-commerce would be, basically the end of 2020 ended where we thought 2025 would be. In other words, we moved ahead 5 years in just 1 year. In fact, in the last 4 months, we've seen about another year's worth of increase. So the pace of change and the rate of change is just continuing to move at a massive, massive rate. And what that means is, as we start seeing e-commerce share shift, we know a few things here. One is there's a lot of different categories inside the store now that are moving almost exclusively to e-commerce. We've seen some of these. Frozen meat right now is running at a 31% share. 31% of frozen meat in the US is sold through omnichannel or e-commerce. That's a really big deal here that changes almost everything about how fulfillment works in the US. So the change in supply, the change in what a store looks like, where product's stored, how it moves all across all these is going to change dramatically. So from a processor side, if you haven't dramatically increased your e-commerce spending budget, you're likely going to be behind. So take a hard look at where your marketing dollars, where your insight dollars, where your research dollars are going, because your customers are moving into this channel at a very fast rate. In the next 3 years, it's going to be a race to see who can win. And what matters when you get there, and I won't take you through all the math here because we're starting to run up against the clock. But at the end of the day, when a item moves from bricks and mortar only to e-commerce as well as bricks and mortar, loyalty increases for e-commerce buyers. E-commerce buyers are extremely loyal. So what happens is brand shares shift. And this is the biggest opportunity you're going to see that's going to shake up from large brand to small brand, but category leadership is going to change all the way through. So what really matters for growth? And as we look into 2021, I get this question in one way or another almost every day. And I'm going to answer it the same way that I do every day. If you want to look at the key for growth and how fast do we come out of this, there is one big number that really, really matters. And it's called mobility. When we do our modeling, we model categories, we help individual companies forecast demand for their individual products and predict it at very low levels. The number one factor that drives our predictive accuracy is mobility. And by that, I mean the data shared by Google and Apple from individual phones rolled up from extremely granular levels on up is almost between 50 and 80% predictive of where retail food demand is going. So if you want to look at one number, master the publicly available data sets from Google and Apple on mobility. And if you can model it, depending on where vaccinations go, you'll have a very good feel for where retail food sales are going later on this year. But here are the big platforms that I believe are going to grow beyond 2021. First of all, it's understand the segments. Know who this confident cook is. Learn and understand more about them because they are driving the growth from last year, and they will continue that cooking behavior at home as they bring restaurant meals back into their house and they bring that restaurant experience back into their house. This is a big group. It's a powerful group, and it's a big spending group. And the more you learn about that, the more effective your marketing is going to be. Second of all, focus on the premium cuts in the meat department. Focus on the premium products from a marketing side. People want their lives made easier. People want their lives made better. And it doesn't matter if you're lower income or higher income. People will find a way to make their lives better, and they will pay for that convenience and they will pay for that benefit. And we've seen it across every category in the stores. Second of all, make sure you're spending aggressively in the e-commerce channel. Now it's a race. It is a flat out sprint to go win. And here in the US, we're going to see major brand shifts from companies that get it. And they're because they will take away business from the companies that don't. In the next 5 years, that shakeout's real. And you're going to be able to see it change probably year over year. And many solid brands may not make it if they're not fully there. Second of all, final part is all about thinking about marketing differently. Think about less about marketing your products and focusing on the recipes that drive inspiration through social media, but create the shoppable recipe platform. And then finally, understand the big occasions that change. Work from home is a cool thing to talk about, sort of, but it's much more powerful when you think about people are eating in different locations and need different kinds of solutions. And there are companies that are building or innovating these products, and they're going to find a way to drive faster growth because of that, because they understand the new innovation platforms, the new ways consumers cook, and the way that they build out their products. Finally, yeah, I'm looking forward to answering your questions. I will make this presentation available for people. You can always feel free to contact us at our headquarters. You can contact me through LinkedIn or Informa. But if you want to go to our website, I guarantee you will not find a better trove of industry reports that keep people up to date on what's been going on throughout COVID, but also what's going on before. These are publicly available. If you go to the website, it's easy to find. And these are the insights and analytics that'll fuel your business. It's free, and I guarantee you, you will not find any company that puts out better material. And finally, if you want to subscribe to those, you can do that here too. So I fully encourage you to. You will get a lot out of it. And I know you'll continue to learn an awful lot. We'll keep you informed. Finally, I wanted to thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening. It's been a real pleasure and an honor, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions.